I'm really pleased to welcome you all to Wonders of the Salish Sea 2022. This is our 6th year and the 2nd on Zoom. And it's so nice to see that this community of people who care about the Salish Sea and want to learn more about it just keeps on growing. So we have 220 people registered, coming from Puget Sound all the way to Desolation Sound. So representatives from all parts of the Salish Sea. So a warm welcome to you all, both those who are here tonight and those watching the recording. Before we get to tonight's agenda, I want to give a huge thank you to Transition Salt Spring for hosting this year's program. If you haven't already, please check out their website to see all the great work that they're doing. Well, I'm so pleased to welcome Sky Bressette to our program. I happened to see a short video that Sky made for the Center of American Canadian Studies at Western Washington University. I was so moved by his deep connection to the Salish Sea ecosystem that I immediately sent him off an invitation to open this year's program. And fortunately, he agreed to this request from a total stranger. So we're very pleased to have him here tonight. After Sky's presentation, which is just half an hour, 25 minutes, we'll have time for a few questions. So please enter those questions in the chat and the hosts will moderate. So Sky, if you're ready.
Of course, let me just get my screen share going here. So hello, everyone. My name is Sky. I am currently in the Bellingham area around Western Washington University on traditional Lummi Nooksack lands. And I've had an interesting journey coming to the Salish Sea. So I'm just going to kind of go over a little bit of my journey in learning what the Salish Sea is to me. So I grew up in the South Sound, in the South Puget Sound, in an area known as the Key Peninsula. It's this little jutting out piece of land here. And I was just surrounded by the water of the Puget Sound. But that is all I knew it by, was the Puget Sound. I never thought of it as anything other than the Sound. It was just the water that existed near Tacoma and just all the surrounding waterways. I never thought of it as going anything beyond that. But I was always loving to get outdoors and be in the nature, in the environment around us. So I was always an avid hiker. I loved to backpack across the Olympics. And it was really on one of these backpacking trips that really made me understand the need for people to go into environmental science, where one day I was going up to Mount Anderson in the that's actually Southeastern Olympics. And we wanted to see Anderson Glacier. So we went up, my dad and I went up to Anderson Glacier, and I'm not sure if you can see it here, but I can zoom in. So you can see the glacier is right there. Which is really sad to see, because in 1911, the glacier looked like that. So there's been a massive change in our environment since that photo was taken in 1911. And I'll just go back one more time. So this is what it is now. And then this is what it was in 1911. It's just was jaw-dropping to me of how much glacial mass we have lost over the years. And that really sparked my journey in wanting to go into the environmental sciences. And that, oh, I forgot this, that glacier is now actually extinct on maps. It is now listed as Anderson Snowfield instead of Anderson Glacier. But as I was going to say, this experience really sparked my joy of wanting to go into environmental science. So I came up to Western to join Huxley, or now it's known as just the College of the Environment at Western, and wanting to study climate change in our local environments. But one thing I didn't realize when coming to Western is I didn't realize what this local environment is, because all I'd known was the Puget Sound as my local environment, the South Sound region. I've never heard of the term Salish Sea before coming to Western. And it wasn't until my near the end of my sophomore year at Western that I was offered to take a class in the Salish Sea Institute, where it was their pilot class. They were launching a new Salish Sea Studies program. And I had the choice of either taking a class that would be for my major, where I would be sitting in a classroom for 4 hours a week in a topic that wasn't that interesting, or taking this pilot class where we'd be going on field trips every Wednesday evening. And it just was kind of a no-brainer. I wanted something different. So I decided to take a whim and take this class on learning what the Salish Sea is. And I'm so glad I did. And it was one of the most influential decisions I've ever made. And it really taught me that the Salish Sea is more than just these bodies of water around us. It is the entire environment that we live. So this is our map of the Salish Sea that a lot of people are accustomed to seeing. I prefer to see it on its side. I think of the Salish Sea as like a tree of life, or some people even like to see it upside down and think of it as the roots that go into the ground that feed the nutrients, or the land feeds nutrients into the water. But this is where we live. And there's just so much to what the Salish Sea is. It is a transboundary watershed. So we see this boundary that has been imposed by humans, but animals, plants, no one else sees it other than just us humans that have drawn this line just on the land. And it really has drastic consequences for our water quality, for different regulations on either side of the border affect the one Salish Sea, because the Salish Sea doesn't care about the border. It's not only it's not only under the jurisdiction of Canada and the US, but also the many indigenous people who live all throughout the Salish Sea, the hundreds of individual tribes and groups throughout the region. And I really learned that it's not just the water, but also the land surrounding the watershed of the region. So all the way up from the tops of the mountains all the way down to the water is all part of the Salish Sea biogeographical region. And I just fell in love that I could study so much, from the glaciers melting to ocean acidification. And I was able to, for my degree, interview very influential people in the creation of the Salish Sea. Daryl Hilaire of the Lummi Nation, Bert Weber, who was one of the people who helped coin the term for the Salish Sea, Natalie Beloy, who helped start the Salish Sea program at Western. They all have just this huge impact in this, what we now call the Salish Sea. And the Salish Sea is still a very young concept that we are still trying to grasp and disseminate the idea of the Salish Sea to the general population more. It's still a very unknown term, and we need to work to help to give this knowledge to people, that it's not just the Puget Sound, like how I learned that we just lived in the Puget Sound. We need more of that in our schools, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. But going back to Anderson Glacier here, as it was melting, it really highlighted a lot of the challenges that we have in such a transboundary region. Anderson Glacier is not alone. climate change is happening throughout our region. The glaciers are melting. So I worked on a project where we watched or were able to use data to see the glaciers melting over the years. So this is looking at the glaciers currently in 1985 on, this is Mount Olympus, and then in 2009, and then again in 2015. And this accounts for over a 25% loss in glacial mass just in that short amount of time. And over 50% of glaciers throughout the Olympic Mountains alone have been declared extinct in this amount of time. So I'm just going to go back one more time because it's hard to see. So this is 1985, 2009, then 2015. And the glaciers continuing to melt and melt leads to issues with like flooding is a big issue that's been happening recently. That the glaciers aren't there to capture this precipitation mass that of all the moist air coming in from the Pacific. A lot of it gets trapped in our mountains, but if it's not cold enough and the glacier, we can't capture that precipitation in the glaciers. And plus the warm weather, the glaciers melt as well, so that increases the volume of water going down into our streams, causing massive erosion. This is just some erosion that happened. I believe this was 2013 in the Mount Rainier National Park, and it just absolutely devastated this road here. And then that also leads to, on the opposite side of floods, are droughts, that we lose all of this water mass through the spring, that into the late summer, we don't have the water to sustain agriculture in the region. We don't have the water to sustain the salmon that are trying to use the streams. When I was hiking through the Olympics in 2015, this is known as Enchanted Valley in the Southern Olympics, the Valley of 1,000 Waterfalls. There were no waterfalls running because it was so dry by this time that there was just no water. And as the water moves into the Salish Sea, we have to account for sea level rise, and there's just so many areas throughout the Salish Sea that are very vulnerable to sea level rise, especially in the low-lying valleys. For example, here we have the Skagit Valley here, and just so much of it is just barely above sea level, or the water is just held back by dikes. And there's just so much land at risk of being lost. And on top of that, because there's less water moving down from glaciers, there's warming streams, and that has consequences for our salmon populations. Salmon cannot survive in these warmer temperatures that are happening because of everything that I've already mentioned. And just, we have a changing ecosystem because of that. There's the whole food chain of the less salmon there are, the less food there are for our orcas and for all the other marine mammals that call the Salish Sea their home. And that is having impacts throughout all of the Salish Sea. Something that is like the Salish Sea is transboundary. This is not an issue that's happening just in the US for me, or just in Canada for many of you. It's happening to all of us. And we have to work together to try to resolve some of these issues. And invasive species as well is becoming an increasing concern. For example, green crabs are doing so much harm in our seagrass beds throughout the Salish Sea. Like Padilla Bay is here in the Salish Sea, is one of the largest marine seagrass beds in the world, but it's at risk of being destroyed by these green crabs that have been brought in and are now thriving in the Salish Sea. So then what's next? Like, I just went on this huge rant essentially about all of these issues that the Salish Sea is facing. What can we do to help the Salish Sea? And what we're doing right now is helping, talking about it, communicating, and bringing awareness to a lot of these issues, educating ourselves. There's a lot of great things that have been done for the Salish Sea. Talking with Bert Weber, who was the man who helped coin the term Salish Sea for this bioregion. He was saying that the Salish Sea is currently the healthiest it's been in many years. We've done a great work of limiting pollution in the Salish Sea, tearing down dams along like the Elwha River, and there are many more dams that are set to be removed in the coming years that help return a lot of the salmon populations. And so there's a lot of great work being done to help the environment of the Salish Sea. There's a lot of great legislative action on both sides of the border to facilitate like cross-boundary initiatives to help the Salish Sea. And most importantly, voting with our dollar of who we spend our dollars on. We want to help support or local businesses just to help just our carbon footprint is just a large part of just climate change in general. And just being active through activism to help bring more awareness to climate change is a real issue, and it affects our own home, our own back door here in the Salish Sea. Oops, come on. And lastly, and for me, the most important way to help with the Salish Sea is more education. More symposiums like this lovely Wonders of the Salish Sea that Deborah's kindly put together, to bringing in place-based education to all of our schools from K through 12 and beyond, and getting students outside and to see the world around them, because that interests kids. Being able to go out and see seals, see the salmon, makes students really care about the environment that they live. And by introducing more place-based education, more education that shows us climate change is happening and it is destroying our environment, it just makes it so that we have these people who are passionate and driven to help make a better future. And that's one of the things that I have tried to do. I didn't say this at the beginning. I'm currently a master's student here at Western Washington University, going into education, into secondary education. And I'm just bringing with me all of my knowledge about place-based education in the Salish Sea and trying to incorporate that into a more formal education setting, because for me, I believe that is needed to help the Salish Sea move forward. All in all, the Salish Sea is on a long road in the future. We don't know what the future of the Salish Sea is exactly, but we know that we have a passionate group of people who are here and want to learn more and want to turn that education into action and to make the Salish Sea a better place. And I thank you all for being here. I realize that this is a little bit shorter. We started a little bit early, but I thank you all for listening to my fairly short talk. And if there's any questions, we can bring up the chat if I can find where the chat went off to. And I also have my email here, sky@salishsea.eco or eco. If anybody would love to, would like to email me, feel free to. I'm quite busy a lot of times, but yeah,
Thanks
I'm always
so much.
happy to respond.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sky. That's a great overview of the ecosystem. We have a few questions so far, and two of them relate to the green crabs. What do the green crabs do to harm the sealgrass? And where was it that the green crabs were ruining the seagrass beds?
Yeah, so the green crabs, let me just go back to the lovely slide with the green crabs. Green crabs are starting to be found kind of more throughout the Salish Sea, unfortunately. So this green crabs have been a huge problem on the East Coast for many years, especially in the Nova Scotia area. And essentially they are introduced into the ecosystem, but they have no natural predators here. And so they just eat and eat and eat in the sealgrass until the beds are essentially just devoid of seagrass. They are native to Europe. They're the European green crab. I don't remember where exactly in Europe, but they are thriving here and are in doing so are harming many sealgrass beds throughout the Salish Sea and elsewhere in the world, not just here. They are being found in many areas. They're being found in the Nia Bay area was some of the first spottings of green crabs, but they're starting to be found in Padilla Bay, up north in the Howe Sound, and even further north. Just they're starting to be found in pretty much every eelgrass bed that there is in the Salish Sea, and there's continuing monitoring projects and trying to figure out a solution to deal with the green crabs, but really we don't have any great solution at this time.
Thanks, Sky. Here's a question for you. What are the top 10 most important ecological indicators of Salish Sea health? And what are the trends in those indicators?
That's a very good question. I think that so throughout most things, like the best indicators are the keystone species, where keystone species are very vulnerable populations. They're very sensitive to change. They could be endangered populations of certain creatures. But I think that it just really depends on what sort of indicators you're looking at. If you're looking at like health of like the ocean or like the sea itself, like the water body of the sea, I think that eelgrass really is an amazing plant, and I can't wait. I think we're going to have a lovely talk about eelgrass later this month, I believe. And they do so much good work for filtering out toxins and other bad things in the environment. And yeah, eelgrass is very important, but like all species are really important, and just trying to keep that web together and making sure that a part of the web doesn't break, because if one part of the web breaks, and it kind of just collapses a lot of things from there. Salmon are another very good ecological indicator. If we don't have a healthy salmon population, not only does that harm those that eat the salmon, like the orcas, but also it harms our local fisheries for economic reasons. And salmon are also very culturally important, and it's kind of like a cultural extinction as well if the salmon end up going extinct like over time.
Thanks so much. There's a lot of Erin Ann had asked if we can eat them, and some people have responded to that.
Yeah, there's a site, I think it's called Eat the Invaders, where it's all about invasive species and how you can eat them. I don't remember the exact website offhand, but yeah, you can eat the green crabs if you find them. I hear they're not as tasty as the rock crabs or the Dungeness, but if you eat them, you do your part for helping get them out of the environment.
Great, and thank you to everyone who's been putting posts in here, links to Invasive Species Council, etc. A question from Catherine: as an educator, how would you teach the marine ecosystem to students in the interior? How to connect with the land ecosystems?
Yeah, that's great. I think that it is really important for students to realize that the land is very much connected to the sea. Like every drop of water that comes from the rain clouds onto land eventually works its way either as surface runoff down to the rivers or underground through our groundwater system. It all ends up back in the Salish Sea. I think if you have local creeks in the area, they are great resource to go and like learn about stoneflies or mayfly larvae and the importance for that for salmon health, because like going back as an indicator species, if you don't have like very many like larvae in your streams, then you know that this stream health quality is a lot lower and it makes it harder for salmon to live there. So everything is connected. And if you don't have any streams nearby, that's a very good question. I'm going to have to definitely think about what to do if there's not any real great water bodies or methods of water nearby on how I would want to teach that to students. Definitely going to put that in my notes for later to try to think on.
Thanks. I was just wondering, as far as you know, in your studies, being an educator in the education program, how many programs are you aware of in the Salish Sea area that do have a Salish Sea curriculum for elementary or secondary students?
It has grown tremendously over the last 4 years that 5 years now that I've been at Western. From when I started, I could not think of like really a single one other than just a few small ones that are still local from like where I was in high school and a few up here, but they still weren't really using the same Salish Sea nomenclature. But within that time span, especially within the last 5 years, I feel like just the term Salish Sea has grown so much, and the emphasis around place-based education has really grown and taken hold in a lot of our communities throughout the region, and they're really incorporating a lot more place-based education type curriculums in our schools. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. I think that there needs to be a lot more incorporation into just every piece of education that we do. We can bring it back to place. We can talk about social justice by looking at cemeteries and like Eastern Washington. There's really great curriculums being developed like that, or to like going out and trying to hunt for green crabs. But just back to your question, there are a lot more now. I can think of 4 or 5 different institutions that are working to try to create environmental ed just in the Bellingham area. And there's a lot more throughout the Salish Sea.
Great. Do we have any? We have a few minutes for a few more questions. Feel free, anyone, and even if you want to unmute yourself and ask Sky. And Catherine just added that there's many online lesson plans from marine organizations around the world. Yes, yeah, it's growing.
I think that I just want to just go off of that point there. I think that technology is a really great resource for students of all ages, that we can, especially even though COVID has really just frankly sucked and brought us or made us all kind of stay at home, it has also opened a lot of opportunities and made a lot of these institutions rethink about their models of, we can now talk to people from around the world. We can talk to these specialists, bring them into the classroom via Zoom, like talk to different people that are expertise, like have expertise in different areas, have them come in and talk to the students virtually. And now that that path is open, we can have a lot more collaboration between professionals in the world of environmental science to our students.
Okay, now that we just have a few minutes left, we have a few questions. We'll try to get through a few of them, probably not all of them, but one is, can you tell us about the Salish Sea curriculum at Western Washington University?
Yes, I can. So currently there is only a Salish Sea minor. You can minor in Salish Sea studies, which was one of the minors I was able to get. So the minor consists of one core course in which is just called the Introduction to the Salish Sea. And you have to take a few other Salish Sea seminars as well. But then you have to have one class from 4 sub-disciplines, which are from like the environmental sciences to anthropology, art and storytelling. And oh man, I'm gonna be on the spot trying to think of this last one. And I think like or human relations with the environment, I think is the last one. But trying to incorporate both at least taking the class of the sciences, of the social sciences, and of art, storytelling, and just communication and journalism to continue to dispense knowledge of the Salish Sea moving forward. Let me find, or I'll post in the link after I'm done with questions, a link to the Salish Sea Institute and their curriculum there.
Okay, thank you so much. Back to green crabs. How do you identify them specifically?
Well, they're green. I'm not any expert on identifying them. I've gone on a few expeditions out hunting for green crabs. I never found a single one. I was working with the Padilla Bay Institute, like just checking traps and stuff like that. We didn't find any when I was working, but there's been a lot more found since then. There's great resources on the internet that show how to identify them, but I feel like the main thing is that they do look a lot greener, and it's not just algae like on their shell. Like if you wipe it off, it doesn't wipe off. They just stay green.
And someone also asked, do they have any natural predators?
No, they don't. And that's the reason why they are such an issue in the Salish Sea. There's no natural predators that are hunting them. So they just kind of grow and grow, continuing to feed and just kind of exponential growth, and keep eating the eelgrass beds until they're gone.
Okay. Yeah, Sheila added, they're ferocious diggers and have uprooted many of the eelgrass beds, causing the beds to gradually deteriorate. And Lori said they're not all green, so that even makes it more difficult to find them. And someone said, count the number of jagged, now I lost that, teeth along their front. I think there are 7 per side. So I think we need to have a whole session on green crabs next year.
That'd be great.
Okay, so well, I just want to personally, well, actually we have time for maybe another question if someone has one more question, and then we'll go for our break. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want.
Well, it's Anne here. I'll jump in.
Yeah.
That someone has a very comprehensive question. So this, I think we could all chew over. And this is from Colin. So as conditions change in our environment, existing species often become maladapted to the environment, right? So to maintain function of an invasive or introduced species may be needed to fulfill a particular requirement. So anyway, the long and the short, do you have any sense that conservation science is moving towards that direction? It's a very theoretical, complex question, but the idea that we have to look to the future to figure out which species might actually be better adapted.
Yeah, that is a very deep and interesting question. It's not really my area of expertise that I focused in as much, but just my 2 cents in about that is that the world is changing and there's really not much that we can do to stop it at this point. We know that there are going to be changes in our environment that we will not be able to stop. And some species will inevitably end up dying out or being pushed out by other species that are more well adapted to whatever the environment is changing to in the future. We see that even now, especially in like these mudflat tidelands, we see the eelgrass being outcompeted by this invasive grass. Oh man, it's been too long since I've thought about that. There's another type of seagrass that grows in mounds. This is more seen along the coast than here in the Salish Sea, but it's essentially changing the geography of the land and making the mud flats a lot drier, where this certain type of grass grows. And so there are going to be changes to the environment. Certain species will be pushed out. They'll either survive or their populations will be reduced, and we'll see what the future has in store.
Yeah, that's exactly very, very well done, because that is a big question. And none of us have the crystal ball. But as you said, we've seen species, fishes moving further north. We've seen more and more invasives come in. Yeah, there's just going to be changes. So we'll have to see what kind of adaptation comes along. And right, as you say, the future is not that well known to any of us. So I guess, what would you say? Cut back our carbon. Something along that line. Thank you. Very good. All right, Deb, back to you. You're going to.
So I want to thank you so much, Sky. I think it's just brings a lot of hope to me, and I'm sure to everyone here, to know that you and people like you are out there really promoting education in the Salish Sea, environmental education in general, to the education system, so that the young people, they're getting that education, and they're going to be the change makers. And so that just, brings a lot of hope to this situation and to our beautiful Salish Sea ecosystem.